Good afternoon, folks. It's just after 1 p.m., so I will call the meeting of the Town of Harwich Board of Trustees of the Harwich Affordable Housing Trust Fund meeting to order. And we will start out with a moment of silence and then some remarks from my colleagues and I. Before we do that, I want to just go around the room and make sure members here and if any members online identify themselves, but I'm Joe Powers, Chair.
Brendan Lowney.
Brianna Powell.
Larry Valentine.
And Brianna joins us as our housing advocate, non-voting member. And Judith Underwood was hoping to dial in. Judith, are you on the line?
Hold on, say that one more time.
Sure. Judith, are you on the line? All right, we'll look to see if she can join us. So as I mentioned, we're going to start out with a moment of silence to acknowledge the passing of our dear friend and colleague, Larry Brophy, who served the town so well in so many different capacities, but certainly as a member of the Board of Trustees. So please join me in that moment. Thank you, I appreciate that. And I would be remiss if I didn't put on the record that the town, through the Board of Selectmen at their meeting when they heard, and we'll certainly do it again here as trustees, to put on our record our condolences to Nan and Larry's 4 boys. I did have an opportunity to meet them at the wake. They were just so very appreciative of the town, meaning living here and working here, and sharing so many great stories that Larry had. I believe one of my colleagues might have also been at the wake earlier than me. Yep, so thank you for that, Brendan. And Nan did say as we go forward, she certainly wants to remain in touch with the trustees and to help us with anything to do with affordable housing. And I told her I thought that was fantastic, and we'll certainly look to do that. She and the boys also indicated that they will be doing services of some sort for Larry here in Harwich soon after our town meeting. So we'll look for that information and certainly look to be a big part of that. I would like to open it up to my colleagues for any thoughts they want to express, but I will take the privilege of the chair to start. And that is just as was said at the board meeting. Larry always had a great story that would always make you laugh, and he and I talked about that makes him a true Irishman because he had the gift of gab and he had a way to put everybody at ease. And then just seeing, as you often do at wakes, when you look at the photograph and you see the person other than the context that you know them in, and just knowing all the people that Larry touched in his life and the experiences and all the amazing things he did. And then getting a chance to talk to the family, it just saddens us that we lost him so soon and so suddenly. But he's a good man who will always be remembered here, and I think as we move forward on affordable housing, we'll always keep him front in our minds. Brendan, anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, I mean, Larry was great, one of the first people I met here in Harwich, and he always saved me a seat at town meetings. He was my town meeting buddy, so I'm going to miss that. And at the wake, Nan said, Larry always felt that every hardworking person deserves a place to live, and she's very excited that we're going to carry on that vision for him. Yeah. So looking forward to that, but he will be missed.
Yeah, thank you. Larry, anything you'd like to offer?
Well, I have much to add because Larry knew everyone in town. I think everyone interacted with him in a positive way. I was telling Brendan before, this came as a shock. I'd actually had some phone calls with him the Thursday that he was hoping to get out of rehab that weekend, and he was expecting me to join him for coffee the next week to have discussions on housing. He's not here to defend himself, but one of the things I remember about him is the last housing meeting we had with the selectmen. I was sitting here and he was sitting next to me, and throughout the meeting he was poking me, making wisecracks, putting comments on the side, which Brendan, you know that how that works.
Well, he would always tap my leg. If you watch the meetings, you'll see Larry do one of those. So I'll miss
so he was definitely involved with the main discussion and some side discussions.
Yeah. And I will know. I will.
As I said, he was, planning board, anything he was on, he was very effective because of his communication skills as you say, Brendan, just how much you cared
Yeah.
for Harwich.
Thank you. And I was remiss in not identifying, my colleagues Brendan and Larry have taken the step of keeping the chair open. So the chair between Larry Ballantyne and I was Larry Brophy's chair, and we keep that open in his memory and his honor. And I think that's a great gesture by you both. I want to open it up for anyone in the public, if there's anything you'd like to add, because again, we'll have this on the records of the town in our minutes. So if anyone wants to add anything from the floor, feel free. All right, thank you. Then moving on. For the official agenda, first item on our agenda is under new business, the report of our housing advocate. Brianna?
Good afternoon. So on Friday, April 14th, I sent out the first Housing Advocate update to the chairs of the Real Estate and Open Space Committee, Affordable Housing Trust, Housing Authority, and Housing Committee. This will be a monthly document sent out with information on what's occurring in the housing office, as well as a central location for brief updates on what each of these committees is working on. And I'll also be posting this to the town website as well. This morning, I emailed out 5 examples of RPs for development of affordable housing to each of you. There were some issues with Brendan, maybe with Larry. I don't know if you received it.
I did
bounced
not.
back. Okay.
I got you, excuse me for interrupting, I got
No, it's
the information from a reply from Judith.
Same here, yep.
I
Yeah.
didn't get it directly, but I know it was I was on your address list, so I don't know what happened.
Yeah, for some reason, your 2 emails bounced back, so I'll work on getting that to you today. And after meeting with Realtor Matt Hemian, who I'll be using for the homebuyer seminar, and mortgage officer Kelly Jansen, we've settled on a date of Thursday, June 1st at 6 p.m. for the homebuyer seminar. That will be free to the public and will be held through Teams, so that hopefully many folks can attend. I'm working on getting a flyer out, and that should have more information where people can register by the end of the week. Last thing is I met with Paul and Jed Goldson to go over a schedule so that she can attend one of your upcoming meetings. And this is a topic that we have later, so I can give more of an update on that then. And that's it.
Thank you, Brianna. Any comments or questions from trust members?
No.
Okay. Next item then is approval of minutes from our March, I believe it's 20th, but I got to double check here. Yeah, the March 20th, 2023 meeting. Are there any motions on the minutes?
Motion to approve with the possibility to strike. There's one comment from Mary Anderson. Board of Selectmen asked about the survey information, how long KP Law needs to be to complete their list. And Murray wasn't clear on what that was referencing. So is that something we would just strike, or?
What page are you on?
It would be page 2, top of page 2. I don't know what it was referencing either without watching the meeting.
Do you have the
Well,
header
Mary's
page?
here, we could ask her.
No, it's not
Mary,
lining up
how many pages did you give me?
Mary Anderson, I don't recall asking a question that had anything to do with KP Law, and because that's the only sentence, there's no context, so it doesn't make sense to me, so I think it should just be deleted, unless you have context.
Reading it now, I think I can add the context. So you've made a motion to approve, and there was a second, and we'll make any deletions or corrections based on that.
Okay.
Anything else to note on the minutes? All right. So it's been moved and seconded to accept with the noted deletion. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, that's 3-0. And now we go to old business discussion on the status of expanded site plan for the property adjacent to Pleasant Lake Avenue, Marceline. So that remains the update that on the additional parcel, just looking here from Katie Klein, I believe the time frame that they were looking at is, it was, I think, 4 to 6 weeks when I updated the last time. I think that Katie indicated that we would probably hear something after town meeting, and she used that reference only because KP Law is tied into town meetings as well. So we should have that in hand well before our next proposed meeting of May 22nd, but nothing new to report on the site work, or excuse me, site review that's being done on that particular parcel. Any other comments or questions about that agenda
I
topic?
think, Joe, for me, could you give us a copy of what the what your request was for their work?
Sure, yeah.
I'd be interested in some of the details that way.
Yeah, what they're doing, and I can send it, KP Law has a subcontractor. Of course, I'm drawing a blank. I want to say it's Marsh, out of Braintree, where they do their, give me a second, vacation brain's kicking in. The,
That's okay, I don't need
Not
that.
survey.
I just would like some more
I need-
details, what was requested.
thank you, will do. It's still gonna bug me. I'm drawing a blank on that one. I need more caffeine. Anything else on the additional property, if I'm reading this agenda topic right?
No.
All right. So next we have request for proposal for the property engineering of Marceline. Now, I know we have that topic, and I think we were talking before about environmental assessments. I know that Brianna and our Director of Planning and Community Development have been meeting and discussing on topics. And Brendan, I think you already knew this, but we were able to locate a preliminary environmental site assessment that was done for the trust back in 2021 by Green Sail Environmental LLC. So that's a document that I'll share with the other trustees. It's a lengthy document, so a lot of pages, but not a lot of content, insofar as they talk about certain environmental conditions and related, but what they've indicated in their preliminary report to the town, and this was just gleaned from the executive summary, that there were certain areas that had, for lack of a better word, piles, and the piles were not assessed.
Right.
And so we
can
do
see
have
them
some
there.
preliminary information on that.
Can I interrupt you, Joe and Brendan? You're agreeing with each other. What are piles?
Just piles of debris and trash that was left there.
Okay, it's not physical condition or anything,
Yeah.
I see.
You can visually see them when you walk down
Okay.
the property.
Thank you.
And as you'll see when you get, no, fair question. When you get the materials in their report, I'm just trying to find the reference again, they relied upon anecdotal information, and they referenced that in the document. So they did not do perhaps as deep of a dive as they normally would do if there were more time available. In the executive summary, they used some acronyms that I needed to familiarize myself with. So I'll throw them out there now, and again, they're in further detail in the document. But they were looking at what are referred to as recognized environmental conditions, or RECs. They were looking at historical recognized environmental concerns, or HREC. And the last one was a CREC, or controlled recognized environmental concern. And so what they indicate is they evaluated those conditions by a site inspection and reconnaissance of the surrounding areas, a review of municipal, state, and federal records, and a review of historical aerial photographs, topographic maps, and/or fire insurance maps. Other conditions of concern that do not meet the definition of a recognized environmental condition and do not appear to pose a threat are identified as other environmental concerns. So they go in further detail about the other environmental concerns, and Larry, that's where they use the phrase piles. So they've described it as several piles of what appear to be loam or fill, a pile of wood and brush, metal and concrete in the south/central portions of the property during site reconnaissance. The only other thing that stood out to me in reviewing this document about an hour ago is that there was anecdotal reference to the expectation that there may be a human body buried on the property in the northwest corner of the property. So I can talk a little bit more about this preliminary environmental site assessment. I know that when staff met, there were some concerns that I heard were raised, so Paul, if you want to take this opportunity to come to the microphone. I know you had talked with the Assistant Town Administrator during my absence last week. You may have some familiarity either with the company that did this, is that what it is? And again, it's Green Seal Environmental LLC.
Good afternoon. I've done some work with them in the past last year. I'd be interested in seeing the preliminary environmental assessment that they did, and based on what you mentioned, Brianna and I saw the same things when we went out there. I also saw some turkey tracks and coyote tracks. There are some mounds out there, and those are somewhat suspicious, and so we should probably, well, I actually want to read the report, but usually when you see something suspicious, that calls for another layer of investigation where they would go in and dig some holes and see if it's just a pile of dirt or if there's something underneath it. So look forward to taking a look at that report. And the other question that we had was whether or not the town had contracted with an engineering firm to do some kind of a preliminary conceptual development design.
So to the last point, my recollection is the only engineering work that had been done to date was for the filing of the approval not required plan. I don't know that there's been anything above and beyond that. Have you found or seen those plans in
No.
your office?
That was what, when Brianna and I had talked last week at our weekly meeting, we had heard about an environmental assessment possibly being done, and I know at our last meeting there was a discussion about conceptual design for how the property could be developed, and so I contacted Megan and asked if she had could provide me with copies of that, and so that was our inquiry on the status of this last week.
Okay. So what I'll be able to do at the conclusion of this meeting, and Brianna, I look for your input, we can put these files related to Marsline because within that are the site assessment, but also several documents relating to soil, or in this case, sand testing, and FEMA maps and GIS things. So we can put it up both under housing advocacy as well as under the Trust's webpage. So we'll put that out there immediately, and I'll also distribute it to trustees so that everyone will have that. But knowing that there was, could you tell me what is meant potentially when they refer to, they did a phase 1 environmental site assessment?
And so there's 2 or 3 phases of doing what a lot of us understand as 21Es under state law. Normally when somebody's purchasing a piece of property and they need a mortgage, the insurance company wants to make sure that that the property doesn't have any environmental liabilities. And so a phase 1 so that there's 3 kind of levels of investigation to make a determination whether or not a property is clean. The first is the phase 1, which is a review of historical records, which is what Green Seal indicated they did, to see if there had ever been any kind of an operation there, either a business or a farm or something that might have involved the use of chemicals or any kind of hazardous materials. So they go through the records of the town. We have environmental engineers coming to town hall asking us if we have heard anything or have files on a particular piece of property to see if what the prior use was. The other thing that they do is they walk the site and they look at aerial photos. They look at a series of aerial photos to do a historical check to see if any buildings showed up back in the 50s. They had a gas station there or something like that. Gas station might have had an underground fuel or oil tank. So that's another activity that they do for these phase 1 environmental reviews. And the third thing is to walk the site. And Brianna and I took a walk on the site a few weeks ago. She showed me the property boundaries. We walked around a little bit. It looks like a great site to develop some affordable housing. We did see some indications of some piles of lumber. We did see some mounds of earth. And when you identify something that could potentially lead to identifying some kind of contamination, that's when the recommendation for a level 2, a phase 2 study, where they would go in and take some soil samples of anything that looked suspicious. If we did not find any 50-gallon drums, but for an example, if you saw some 50-gallon drums laying around, an environmental engineer might decide that it would be a good idea to sample the soils in the surrounding area and test for certain types of chemicals. The third phase type of environmental assessment is after maybe you've discovered some type of contamination, by doing further study to try to gain a better understanding of the extent of contamination. So if there was a spill or something of some kind of contaminant, they might then, the environmental engineers would come up with a game plan to install monitoring wells to take water samples to determine the extent of some kind of a plume of contamination. So it's peeling away the layers of the onion. If you find something that, a yellow flag, then you study it a little further until you've determined that it's not a problem. But if a problem is identified, further investigation to understand the scope and extent of the problem. So I think it's great that they did a phase 1 investigation. Look forward to reviewing that, and I can provide you with some comments on recommendations about what we should do next. That might be fine, and we just leave that alone, or there may be it might be a good idea to go the next step or have some follow-up questions with Green Seal.
Thank you. Any questions from trust members?
I'll keep looking at Brendan because he's been here longer than I have. But you want to throw me under the bus?
No, I can answer a question if you like.
No, I appreciate your comments because when you mention piles, all of a sudden you become worried about what's there with the hazardous waste that you have to look at, and that would be phase 2, I understand. When do what's our obligation to report to DEP? Is it results of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3?
So the professionals that do this kind of work, it's overseen by licensed site professionals. They've been certified by the state as expert environmental engineers that know how to clean up contamination and hazards. So they would make a determination of whether or not we would need, another level of investigation, and specifically what to look for, like, doing some core samples in those mounds of earth to see if there's anything down there except soil.
Yeah. And one of my interests is that I'd like to see a conceptual plan go forward to inform our RFP, give some ideas of what's going on, but we cannot do that, I assume, until we've done the phase 1, however we go with the environmental assessment.
I think that we could go forward with both kind of concurrently, and I'd be glad to help prepare a scope of work for getting a conceptual design of the property, of how it could be developed, and I can work with Brianna and Joe on that. And once we've got a scope of work that describes, simply what we'd like to have a designer do for us, we can then finish that up and release it and reach out to some engineering firms that could, landscape architects, designers, surveyors, engineers, that could help put together a game plan for us, or better, kind of maybe 2 or 3 different alternative design approaches for the trust members to take a look at and decide which direction we want to go in.
Just one more, if I may. Brianna sent us Brewster or Yarmouth, one of those.
Both.
Both,
Yeah,
I think.
Millstone.
I got kind of late in the day, so I didn't read them both. I read one of them in there. Their RFP was fairly general. I think one of them says a maximum of 90 units, and there's some other caveats in there. Does a conceptual plan, does that give us to that point where we could say with, vernal pools and stuff going on, we would, RFP would say maximum of 50 units. Does it, just want to be sure, I've been pushing for a conceptual plan, but I want to be sure it leads us to the RFP. Do they follow?
I think that a conceptual plan would help the trust members through a series of decisions that should be made before we write the RFP. There are some basic threshold questions about what we would want to do with the property. Do we want to own it and keep owning it and be like or do we want to lease it? We could sell it, and under certain terms of, so say you decided to sell the property and you have 3 different conceptual designs that were prepared by a multidisciplinary engineering firm, and you've decided that you'd like, design number 2 that preserves open space, has some common areas, a playground, things like that. I like number 2. Then when we write the RFP, we can say that we're selling the property and we'd like to see it developed similar to concept design 2. So the couple of basic threshold questions that you have to discuss is, what do you want to do? You want to hold it, lease it, or do you want to sell it off? But I think that getting some kind of conceptual designs will get us all on the same page about what's important, what does a town want to see built into a design for some affordable housing.
One last request, I guess, and based on good discussion, Paul, I think what would help me, and maybe as we present this, is you're in writing the sequence of events that you would see going forward.
I'd be glad to do that, and Brianna and I have started to talk about this, and we don't want to take it too far until the trust gives us some direction to go forward, and then we're ready to move on it and help provide you with the information you need to make good decisions on how you want to develop the property.
So, okay, I think that'd be good. Even before we make decisions, what would be the proper sequence we should be looking at?
And since you have a housing expert under contract, what I would probably do is have a conversation with Jennifer Goldston and Brianna to talk about that before I put in writing, here's what we should do, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to run it by the expert.
I think that last comment's a great idea, because I don't know if conceptual drawing, is there a need? Can we put it in verbiage? Do we need to spend that money? And I guess the question would be like, who would be doing that, the concept? Would it be, are we paying for it? Are you paying for it? Are we doing RFPs for it?
So the dollar amount that triggers the need to do a request for proposal would kind of dictate that process. I think that we could probably do something like this without triggering that threshold, and I'm looking at the Chief Procurement Officer for a nod. So most of the time, it's safe to say the dollar amount decides what the procurement process is. But I think that we might be able to get something done without triggering a formal request for proposals process. The other thing is that designer services are exempt from Chapter 30B, and those are usually things that the engineers do, similar to exactly what we're talking about. We would probably look at other developments in other towns to see who designed those. Would be one way to start a list of possible companies to approach. And then there are companies that do bigger projects like this, and we would see who's out there on the Cape that does this kind of work that we could tap and see if they could work with us on coming up with some conceptual designs.
You don't see them in coming directly from the developer?
So if we choose not to do this, not to do any conceptual design, which it's not, I think, a hard and fast requirement in this process, we could write the RFP and see what the developers come back with. And you could even bake into the RFP a requirement for the developer to show us a couple of different design scenarios. And that way, if you receive a number of proposals, you've got a wide variety of design options to consider. there are certain elements, and I've talked to Larry a little bit about this. There are certain design elements that I think that we need to have a conversation about and confirm that yes, we would like to preserve open space. And yes, we would like to try to minimize the extent of clearing the natural vegetation. And yes, we would like to have low-impact development, sustainable development design principles. We'd like to have LEED-certified, energy-efficient buildings built. We'd like to provide some amenities on site. And if we can all nod and say, yeah, Paul, those are all great ideas, then that's the kind of stuff that we'll put into the request for proposals.
So it'd be nice to get in front of Jen or have her here. And I think we should really start the RFP.
Yeah.
I don't see a need to wait,
Right.
at least get it going, or get Jen to the table. If she's gonna be the one that's gonna consult and help us, then we should do that. You're talking anywhere from a 60 to, the one we recently got is a 109-page document. And I'm sure there's a lot of legality to it that you just can't throw your ideas on paper and wish for the best. So I think it would be a great idea to get Jen to the table, but focus on launching that RFP.
My response is agreement. It would be good. I do like the idea of giving developers as creative process as we can. I was trying to look through somehow to get moving and we do the conception, that helps. But I guess the barrier we've run up to, Joel, in the past is how do we write an RFP that gives it, as you say, gives developers some creativity possibilities and still meets the procurement checklist, because I would like to make it, I agree with you, Brendan, make it as general. We got a lot of smart developers around. Give them a chance to come up with ideas on where they go forward. So I like your suggestion.
Yeah.
If I could build off of that last comment, generally speaking, when you construct the RFP, the devil is in, if it is, as Paul has mentioned, if it does rise to the level of a request for proposals, that's because it's greater than $50,000 in what we're looking for. 50,000 to 100,000, I think, is RFP, if I'm remembering that correctly. And then beyond that, could be sealed bids and a different process altogether. But with the RFP, the devil in the details is how you want to judge the RFP responses. So you can be broad in your RFP, and one of your criterion could be that response that gets to the greatest number of affordable housing units or some other thing, meaning you're telling them that your basis for approval is based on these criteria. Other than that, you leave it up to them to propose what they propose.
Yeah, I wouldn't put a number on it.
Right.
I think that would be something.
So my overall point is, as we've done with, well, as you know, Larry, from the board, 204 Sisson Road, you know, we can be as broad as we want to be in the language. We want to be a little bit tighter, but not overly tight on the criteria to judge. And so we don't have to do numbers, but we could make statements that we would consider the responses to be highly advantageous.
Okay, that sounds good. Brendan, just for you and I'll make a statement, and I'm not always very consistent. If someone else makes a better statement, I change quickly. So be forewarned.
Yeah.
I like the
I mean, even the environmental study, I understand that. It's great we had the first phase done, and we also had another geoengineer take a look at it as well, just looking at the FEMA maps and GIS and everything else. So if that next phase is necessary, then it'd be nice to even start that process and get some RFPs out there if we need that, to see what that would cost would be.
Yep, good.
I
But I
do,
would like to race towards the RFP, and if that can lag, you know, we can always put the brakes on. It'd be nice to get those two things in motion, if you think it's that important, Paul. So,
I do need to go back to earlier comments as the procurement wet blanket.
Yeah.
When we're talking about Jen Goldson. So Jan Goldson Associates is under contract with the town through the trust to build an action plan. So there is no language in that allows us to work with her as a general consultant.
yeah.
But that doesn't prevent us, and when we're talking about procurement, if it's, say, 10,000 to 50,000, and a consultancy contract of that nature could definitely fall under that pricing range. It's soliciting 3 quotes. You don't need to get 3 responses, but you need to get, ask for 3 quotes. if J.M. Goldson were to respond for that request for quotes, the town has the right to enter into a contract because they were responsive to the request for a quote and because there's history. But we can't rely upon the present agreement because that was specifically for an action
Action
plan.
plan. Okay, fair enough.
Not an insurmountable hurdle, but a little bit of a hurdle. Paul, I want to go back to some discussion on the Phase 1, if I could.
Sure, if I could, before you ask that question, it is also possible for us to do a minor amendment to our contract with her for 10 hours of general consulting. And that could open the door for us to be able to ask questions back and forth, ask her to review a draft RFP, that kind of thing. So I just throw that out there as an option. She's under contract. This would be a minor amendment for some general consulting services, and then Brianna and I would have access to our expert that could help us move forward.
So the only concern I have with that as CPO is I believe we had a dollar amount that if we then went, say it was 15,000, that puts us over the threshold. And under mass procurement, if we now went past 50, we're able to do the quotes, but now we're in the realm of RFP, and they say you have to stop and then do it like an RFP. So I think it's cleaner and better to do the request for quotes and do a separate agreement. And that's something that Brianna and I can work on immediately to just get quotes on that. Assuming, which is a bad word to use, but that the trustees are comfortable with using funds available to the trust to fund that contract. Because that's the only consideration, really.
I mean, it's a serious document. I don't know. We can give it a shot and try to write it ourselves. I don't know if that's a great idea.
I believe in experts, actually, so.
Yeah, so we can do a request for
I'm a big fan of
quotes.
the copy and paste, I think that's a bad road to go down. So I think it's very specific to Harwich and Harwich's needs.
If I'm hearing the discussion correctly, we can do a general consultant contract, someone like J.M. Goldson, to advise generally on various housing matters. And that augments the work that Brianna's doing, that Paul's doing, that I'm doing. And I think there's a good value statement there. So that's the quick one that I'm talking about, that we can rely upon trust fee funds if everyone's in agreement with that. Thank you. And then, Paul, for me, going back to the Phase 1, and again, having the benefit of having it stare me in the face, there were two things that when you get the document, I'd ask you to focus on pages 20 and 21, under the heading of site reconnaissance. There is, under the category of solid waste dumping / landfills, is more of the discussion of the quote piles. But within that, they've indicated that there are mounds covered with vegetation were observed, but they did not impact upon them because of the level of vegetation. So there are piles, and then there are mounds, and then, so that's something where they refer to it under solid waste dumping or landfills. I think we'd want to take an additional step of analysis or evaluation. On page 21, under the topic of interviews, and that's, again, they relied upon interviews of people with historical knowledge and facts of the property. They make reference to potentially the body being buried there. So they make reference under, I think it was, they call it OHM. I don't see the acronym anywhere, so I'm going to suggest that they might refer to that as other hazardous material. They make the reference to the fact that there were no other OHM other than the potentiality of human remains. So based on what you said earlier in the discussion we had, would you recommend that we do a Phase 2 or the next step? And sorry, the third thing you'll find is there is a reference in here where they indicate that they would have done more at the time, but they were under a tight deadline. And if memory serves correct, they were brought under contract to help the trust assess as the trust was finalizing the closing on the property. So there was very much a timeliness to it. But recognizing that they're talking about they would have done more with more time, what would you recommend, given the two elements I mentioned on the 2 pages plus that comment of potential next steps for site assessment, if anything?
A phone call to the people at Green Seal that did the work to see what they would recommend be done in addition to what they included in their report. So if they said, we normally would have done more had we had more time, just tell us what that is.
Yep.
Regarding the possibility of a body being buried on the site, have you discussed that with the chief of police?
No, this is my first utterance of it
So that,
in a public meeting for transparency purposes.
so
Um,
I would recommend that, and I imagine that the county has some dogs that could
Sure.
possibly detect.
So for me, the way that, and I will just put out there that this is a public document, so people will be able to read it at their leisure, but one of the individuals relied upon for historical knowledge was the individual that mentioned it and is very well known to people in town. I'm not going to disclose right now, just because there's no need to, but my take on the reading of it is that it was understood, I think, to be a burial of a family member, however long ago. So for me, my next steps would be to our burial agent, which for Harwich is the town clerk, to see if there isn't any material already on file. So there may be a record of the burial to then take the next steps for, because there would have to be exhumation, and that exhuming can only happen with the burial agent approving it. So my next step will be to talk to the town clerk.
Okay, the other town entity that's involved with burial sites is the Board of Health. And under state law, they have to approve any burial site in a community. And so it's possible that they might have some records that they had authorized this. But I've only run into this a couple times.
Yep.
And that was one of the things that I learned when someone was requesting a burial outside of a normal designated graveyard.
So the laws have changed on that in the last 10 years to allow for green burials and whatnot. If we're talking about an ancient act, which for the Commonwealth is something that happened prior to 1924, it would be only the town clerk's office. Health agents weren't brought in until after that time, but we're still getting to the same point. But I wouldn't want anyone to take from my discussion of this that it was understood to be a nefarious act. Rather, it was understood to be an allowable act potentially where the cause of death was not in question. It's just a question of where they buried it and why.
I think that's an important distinction to make to the public.
Absolutely. But I take you on, next steps would be to have a conversation with the professionals that did the report and see how they left it. Anything else for this topic under that agenda item? So again, all the materials that I just referenced will be uploaded, and I think we'll do it to both locations. Brianna's website is Housing Advocate, but also to the committee's page. And they'll be marked as Marceline Property Information.
Okay.
And before we move off of that topic, if there was any other comments to come from the gallery, we'd open up the mic for that. All righty then. Next on our agenda is discussion on Community Preservation Committee to approve Affordable Housing Trust application to $500,000 from $250,000. And before I go any further, I know that you both reached out to Brianna for topics. So if any of these are your topic, I will yield and defer to anyone else. So I think all three of us could speak to this one, but if anyone wants to start. I believe, Larry, you were there?
I was not, I was
I was
unfortunately
there.
attending a funeral.
All right. So this was an effort, I believe, that the Board of Selectmen initiated. I'm just trying to identify the culprits. I know, thank you, Mary Anderson and Michael McCaskill? Yep. So Selectman Anderson, if you'd like to update us?
Yes, Larry was originally going and couldn't and asked me to go in his stead. So Michael and I attended the meeting and made a respectful pitch that they increase the amount. Had kind of a good discussion about some of their concerns and our concerns. And after said discussion, they voted, I think it was 6-2,
6-2.
to up it to 500,000. I think the more interesting takeaway from that meeting is the trust has to communicate better with CPC, and Brendan and I have had discussions on that. I think they understand that you can't tell them up front, you know, this money, we're going to purchase A, B, and C, because you don't know that. But at least to be able to tell them, these are some possibilities of things that we would look to do, that, you know, different ones that we've talked about, and getting a really thorough year-end report to them. I think that's their biggest beef, was they felt the communication was not great. And one of the members showed me the trust application, and it was very cursory. You know, it basically just said, we're the trust, give us $500,000. You know, there wasn't much more to it. So I think just more attention to those two things, and we'll be okay.
Thank you for that.
You're
And,
welcome.
Thank you to the board for that effort. I will point out that the request, the original request was for the 500,000, so CPC was restoring the original ask of the trust, but kudos to the board members, Larry, Mary, Michael, and I think the entire board supported that. So thank you for your efforts, because I know that the trust can rely upon that going forward. Anything else on item C? Item D is a discussion on creation of a summary sheet covering what Harwich Affordable Housing Trust has accomplished to date, and to have that posted on the website. And I know that I can already turn this over to Brendan Lowney, who has such a draft document.
Yeah, so what I did is I already passed them out, and it's just the first draft, but maybe we need 2 pages. One with, you know, what we're up to, and the second one is about the properties. There's a lot of misinformation about the properties. I mean, I expect everyone to watch our meetings at 1 o'clock on a Monday, but just to break it down, this sheet here, and we can even post it on the website, it will show each property, the 5 that we own, what actions have been done to date. So for example, Oak Street, it will list the parcel, the acreage. I mean, you can find all this information, but you have to grab it from different documents. And then milestones or notes to date, be very simple. You know, we did a site plan that's been completed, and we think we're ready for an RFP to sell it. It's something that can maybe only yield a 1 or 2 bedroom house, maybe. It still has to go in front of conservation and health, but it might be at a point where, you know, this would be a property we can move and sell. It's not something that could ever be developed to produce multiple units. So even though it's on 3 acres, it's only limited to a very small postage stamp of property that's viable. So, and then also there's, at the very bottom of the page, properties we've discussed. We've mentioned properties, whether it be Earl Street, the Marceline property with eminent domain, which we've already addressed that today, Depot Street. Depot Street's interesting because there's 2 other properties. There's 2 other parcels, J4 and J5, that complement J1, 2, and 3. And if you were to look at Depot Street in Orleans Road, J1, J2, and J3, that was given to us by Article 61 at the 2019 meeting. And that lot has restrictions. It's really just a zoning restriction of 10,000 square feet per bedroom. But if you were to bring those other parcels in, even though you can't build on them, that could bump that up.
Rounds it up, yeah.
Unless you do a 40B, then it's a non-issue. But it would give us, if we had to sell that property, if we wanted to sell that property, there's more potential buyers. So it's something to think about. So that's why maybe keeping the properties of discussion, you know, the Arbor House was originally on Article 61, it was dropped off. 70 Willow Street, it's in the hands right now of the Board of Selectmen, and something's going to be happening with that as well. So properties that we talked about, and this is really for Larry to get a better overview of all the properties as well.
Yeah.
So, but I don't see why we can't list it, and it'll be a nice property, you know, we can bring this to CPC, and, you know, they can see exactly what's going on, so.
First of all, thank you for compiling it, and I will recognize Chair of Rios in a moment. So right now, we're just talking about the concept of a summary sheet, but the next item,
I just wanted to make a correction.
I know you do, and you're going to have an opportunity under the next item, lets us discuss all of the properties. So right now, we're just trying to decide if we're going to do a summary sheet.
Brendan was saying Depot Street, it's Depot Road with J1, J2, J3, not Depot Street.
Thank you. We're still going to talk about it under the next topic, and I'm still going to reserve the right to call you back up. But with regard to the summary sheet that Brendan's provided,
Oh, I just misspoke. It's correct on here, but I just misspoke. Thank you.
Okay.
any other comments about a summary sheet?
Yeah, Brendan, why don't we date this, and so we know?
Yep. Like I said, this is first draft.
Yeah.
If we do, I want to work with Brianna on this and clean
Well,
it
I
up.
think this is a great idea. I just say, put a date to it, because I can
Mm-hmm.
see this coming out monthly, and I can see this being a cover sheet of a package that follows it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
It'd be,
Yeah.
be great.
And it's something we can attach right to the application for
Absolutely.
CPC, so it'd be a good thing to have.
Brendan, thank you for that effort, and I think it's going to be a great document, even more than what you have here, in the way that you just mentioned it with you and Brianna partnering on it. So then moving on, and I would ask the chair from Rios to be available. So the next topic builds off of that, but it is a discussion of all properties owned by the trust. So we know that on the report that you've mentioned, Brendan, there is 0 Depot Road and 0 Orleans Road. And those are map 63 parcels J1, J2, and J3. And that was the correction, correct?
Yes.
Thank you. And then under the page you have here, talking about properties to be discussed, there's Depot Road, J4 and J6. So, Elaine, would you feel comfortable coming up and just talking about, because I dug into this to try to educate myself, and know that there was a presentation at the Board of Selectmen in March of 2019 where parcels were removed from the list in the article.
Right.
So the last known discussion of it is different from what then went to town meeting in May of 2019. And if memory serves correctly, with the documents I saw, there were some concerns of abutting neighbors about the entire property being J1, J2, J3, J4, and J6, which is why J4 and J6 were removed before it went to town meeting.
That's correct.
Does that, okay, can you offer any insights that you have on that?
Only that J1, J2, and J3, there was concern with J3 as proximity to vernal pools. And therefore, they were keeping the boundary, the distance that had to be with, so anything with that property, there would be that line, that demarcation that you couldn't build beyond there or get into the vernal pools as protection for them. Yeah, and 4 and 6 were removed. And there is town-owned property that abuts it too, that you know, so, yeah, that's.
So in,
about it.
in the amendment, it was 100 feet north of the
Right.
northernmost, state classified vernal pool.
Right,
But you'd still have to meet those requirements. I think a vernal pool would be 60 feet, but you got the 100 feet. So anyways,
yeah, but J1 and J2 are still buildable lots.
yes, but you can combine, you could take all the lots for the square footage and
Right.
get more build in J2 and J1.
But if you all decided that you were not going to use that property,
Mm-hmm.
it could be sold and that someone else could build on those 2 separate lots if they wanted to.
They could do that, or they could use all the square footage and meet the requirements of the Zone 2.
Right,
So the 10,000 per bedroom square foot.
right.
So you could do, it would
Yeah,
meet the multifamily.
I mean, the point with all these properties is if you make the decision that it's not suitable for your needs,
Mhm.
then dispose of them
Mhm.
and take the money and use that to develop the properties that, or to purchase other properties maybe that you're interested in. Real estate and open space has looked over a lot of properties, and there are some we could even recommend for you. But being as nothing's happened yet, why give you more when you haven't dealt with the ones you have?
What's your recommendation for J4 and J6 then? If it was not in with this parcel? If it was not in with J1, J2, J3? What would you recommend for 4 and 6? For it just to be open space?
Open space or turn it over to under the care and custody of the Board of Selectmen? And let them, because you have a budding property that's owned by the Board of Selectmen, could just enlarge that. Because then you're starting to get closer, moving west, you're starting to get closer to other developable areas. So, I don't have the map in front of me, so, I can't really.
If I could just offer some information from the assessor's website as you're having this discussion. As we've noted, J1, J2, and J3 are now in the care, custody, and control of the Board of Trustees. Parcels J4 and J6 are controlled by the Board of Selectmen.
Right.
So there's nothing that would prevent the town, through the Board of Selectmen and the Harwich Trust, working on those together, other than the land would need to be transferred from the Board of Selectmen to the
Right.
trust if we went that way. So that's the facts. I'll let you get back into the discussion because I have my own comments. But the only other thing I would add is under J1, 2, and 3, there's a total of 23 1/3 acres. When you add the two other parcels, it goes up to 28 and just over 28 acres. And Brendan, is that what you were talking about as far as being able to use the entire?
I believe so, yes, because it is in a zone 2, so it'll be something to, but you would need a minimum of 10,000 square feet per bedroom.
But
So it'd be
then,
advantageous for us to acquire 4 and 6 to be combined with that. So if we did sell it, there's more you could do with the property, because there's always been restrictions put on it. And you can really only build in J1, J2, and about 10% of the north portion of J3.
so acquiring that, if that would then allow you more density,
Correct.
but would J1, J2, and part of J3 be suitable for that density?
The density could sit within J2, J1, but we'd have to double check that. But yes, the density would give you more availability for density up in those areas. Are you saying we were getting too close to the north side or getting too close to south?
Well, I think if you go to 4 and 6, you're going too far southwest.
Yeah, so there's nothing that can really be done with that property.
But without them, the number of units you could put on J1, J2, and partial J3, would they increase even more by having 4 and 6, or would it just?
You'd have the
You'd
possibility.
you'd still have the same limit.
Paul, can you answer to that? That's a health question, right?
So Paul, why don't you come to the table? So you have a mic, Elaine? You
Wanna
can
make
either
sure I'm
stay
accurate
there or
with
come
it,
to the
but,
table
yeah.
as well, but
Yeah.
come on up. That way you can both have a conversation. And as you do that, I just want to put out there, though, J4 and J6, it would not be a matter of acquisition. The town, through the Board of Selectmen, already own the property. If we all wanted to change that, that would simply be vote of town meeting, I believe, to change it from the board to the trust. But my reason for bringing this up is something happened in March of 2019, and I don't know that it was a butter's input or what, but it changed it from the 5 parcels to the 3 parcels we see. So I think we'd be wise to know that if we go that route, that issue may still be out there. Paul, to the question of density, I think. Brendan, is that right?
So if there are contiguous lots that we want to do a development on, removing the lot lines so that we just have one lot eliminates the need for setbacks. And so there you have some increased development if you don't have 20 or 30-foot setbacks on 2 sides of a lot line.
Right.
It also makes it a lot easier to develop the property if there's just one. So,
Yeah.
So the town could seek permission at town meeting to transfer ownership and responsibility, and could, through the planning board, merge lots together to create a lot in which we would like to build affordable housing on. I heard mention of a possible vernal pool.
Yeah, there's 2, I think there's 2 on the property.
Have those been certified
Yes.
by the state?
Yep, they're certified.
Okay, good.
Paul, specifically, if memory serves correctly, there was an amendment to Article 61 at the 2019 town meeting that J3, because of the vernal pools, there was language put in that caused restrictions, correct?
Yes.
So it was an amendment from the floor. So if you were reading the warrant, you don't see that, you'd have to go to the town meeting minutes to see that reflected.
And there's the state 100-foot setback from those, so there's a big area that can't go near.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I guess for that property, I would like to see us get those other 2 parcels. That's
Yeah.
kind of where I was leaning
Yeah.
towards, just to make it more attractive if we do sell that, or if it can be developed.
And, Joe, you and I have had these discussions on other occasions on, well, I'll be sure, because Brenda, I'm glad you brought this up, because I do think we want to be sure that we separate out the concepts of zoning from protection of vernal pools. Because we could combine those lots, give us more options on what we can build there, and still fully protect the vernal pools and not have anything within 100 feet.
Mhm.
That vernal pool area then adds area to the lot that allows us to work within our zoning.
Right.
So it gives a critical option that we need to pursue. I would agree.
And I believe, all of 6 and over 70% of 4 is in the well zone anyway, so.
Yeah.
That might meet,
It's just playing a numbers game with the area that we have
That's-
available to us.
Well, given that we're 378 days away from town meeting, trying to get it right, thank you.
can sneak something in?
378 days from the next town meeting. That joke aside, that's just about enough time.
Yeah.
Meaning, if we're contemplating that, we should begin soon after this year's town meeting to work on that. And then if for some reason there is a special town meeting, perhaps in the fall, I know of no reason yet, it could be done at that special town meeting. But if we're thinking of it, now's the time to do the due diligence. And for me, that would be, first and foremost, trying to assess what the reasons were back in 2019 that those 2 parcels were pulled. So that history does repeat. So rather than repeating, let's try and find out what the precipitating factor or factors were, if there are abutter issues or anything else.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't recall right now, and I don't want to say anything and be wrong.
Right, sure. Paul?
I haven't seen what Brendan's been working on, but I'll offer to help out. I think as an entity that owns and manages, disposes of, and develops real estate, that it would make sense to take what Brendan's done and put together a portfolio of all of their properties. And there would be in a standard format, the acreage, when it was acquired, how much we paid for it, what the zoning is, whether there are environmental constraints there, aerial photos of the property surrounding that, who owns the abutting properties, that kind of thing. And having something like that was on the trust webpage, be great for people to have a better understanding. If you sell a piece of property, you list it, but say sold, you're a property owner, and you own multiple pieces of property, and it's held in the public trust. And I think putting together as much data that we can put together that's available, not doing any, not commissioning any studies, but from what's available, FEMA maps, historical maps, anything that we can find that helps describe the property, put it all together in a portfolio.
Mhm.
Yeah. Because my guess is it was dropped from the original article because
Yeah, it was never in the original.
because the vernal pool just came up and no one thought about combining the lots at that time.
Right,
Do something with it.
right.
Yeah, it was never in the article at all.
Yeah.
The only one that was really dropped was, I believe, the Arbor House.
Harbor House, yeah.
Yeah, that was just dropped, and we just went with the 4 properties. But I don't know why the other 2, because they sit really,
Mhm.
Right.
you can't, they're non-buildable lots, so
Yeah.
maybe that was the reason behind it. But it'd be advantageous for us to do so. I don't see why not.
Absolutely.
So our next item on the agenda is a specific property, and that's Oak Street. So before we get to that, any other comments to add with regard to all properties owned by the trust, but the specific discussion we just had? Map 63, parcels J4 and J6 as they relate to J1 through J3. So we can dive into that, because again, there's time, but there's just enough time to do it properly. Selectman Anderson, please.
Just before you leave that, I'm just curious on the 265 Sisson Road that's on,
Yeah, we're gonna run, I was gonna run through the rest
oh,
of the
you're going to hit that
properties.
later?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, all
Absolutely.
right.
And by later, you mean right now, right?
Right now, Joe.
All right.
I don't know where you're gonna go, but we're gonna do it.
Well, so, to Board Member Anderson's question, properties owned by the trust, 265 Sisson Road, again, one of those properties that was under Article 61 of the annual town meeting. What is your understanding of that? Was that your general question, Member Anderson?
Yeah, the status says landlord issued a clarify legal opinion. I'm curious what's going on there.
Yeah, so that came up at one of your board meetings, and the lawyer's opinion was the trust wasn't really meant to be a landlord. So that's really not, is it in our purview or is it not? So that was the only question there. You know, and there has been work done at that property with a septic concept that was really done based on an old, not RFP that never went out, but there was a couple of, maybe 4 quads, 16 units that were gonna be placed there. But that goes back to making it attractive for developers. The magic number for any RFP going out to build affordable housing, 16 just doesn't, it's not the number that works based on the certain programs and what percent you want to do AMI and everything else. So, yeah,
Brendan, if I can just interject, because the map number there does not comport with 265 Sisson.
yeah, I changed that. I got 2 different maps.
Yep.
Like I said, this is just a draft, this one, Mary. So I'll clean this up, but I did change that number because I had 2 different.
Well, if I could
Map numbers.
very specifically, so it's map 40, parcel Z as in zebra 5,
Yeah, that's what I have.
but it's better known as the Harwich Junior Theater.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the landlord issue comes in. So now that I know that one, see, we can hide in plain sight when we do that. So the issues were, the town still enjoys a lease with a tenant. The lease has 9 more years left on it. The town has the ability to change the lease if we wanted to, but that's a Board of Selectmen discussion. The trust, according to the attorney, could theoretically enjoy the benefits of that lease without being the landlord, or be the landlord, but that's not really what the purpose was when it was being presented at town meeting. Now, Brendan, I'll make a statement, and similar as Larry said, if you can correct anything. My understanding is, what was discussed at the 2019 town meeting was part of the parcel, separate from the building, was being contemplated for an additional building that would have housed affordable housing.
Right, it was a bill, yes.
Yeah, so the long story short is the trust, based on actions of the trust in the town going back to, I think, 2021, the trust owns the parcel.
Correct.
And the way that it was conveyed is the trust owns everything on the parcel. So then, to the question, there's still the unresolved issue of what to do with the tenant and who would be the landlord if the tenant relationship exists. So Board Member Anderson still has the floor if you'd like, if you had any follow-up. But I believe that's generally where we're at. There was some work done that was relative to part of the parcel, but the question now evolves greater than that to the building and the parcel.
So this is just more a statement than a question. I don't know why we wouldn't want to pursue that and change the lease. We've got 204 to maybe move them there, and, because that's just sitting there. And I don't know why we couldn't just move forward with an RFP on that one. Just my 10 cents, and it would take the selectmen, correct, to agree to that change in the landlord thing?
I believe so, yep.
But so that's just my 10 cents.
Yeah, I think we need to be sensitive. I mean, I'm very new to the town. I've been here for 7 years. So every time that building comes up, someone spent time
Yep.
there as a child, and, you know, and I want to be sensitive towards that, what happens to that property, and there's classes currently going on there, and programs already set up. So it'd be nice to put that consideration, or maybe even get the director here to have an open discussion, if they're even up for that. I mean, obviously, the word around town is that that is a possibility. So it'd be nice to get, I think, the director of the theater here as well, just to talk some ideas before we make any decisions, or any more word gets out on town, just how I feel about it.
Chair, two more cents. If it was decided to move to a four-citizen, which I think would be a better, personally, I mean, you got a stage, you got an auditorium, whatever. That house is also in a historical district.
Correct.
So if you were to get someone who would maintain the historical integrity of that building, renovate it, and how many apartments maybe could you put in that house?
I mean, I've been in there, it's,
Regardless of the
yeah.
rest of the property, what you do with
I
it.
mean, ideally,
There's-
yeah.
A possibility for some housing in that house.
Yeah, ideally, the easiest thing to do is just convert that building. And whether it's 4 or 5 or 6 units, I'm sure that's possible. Very similar to the young developer, Mr.
Mr.
Larry?
Carey.
Mr. Carey. He's doing a great job on the old schoolhouse.
And he
So-
said he's looking for other properties to work
Mhm.
on.
But this time, there'd be, restrictions on, it would have to be for affordable. That was not sold that
Right,
way.
right.
So we would definitely put that restriction. And then historic, of course, would go in front of the historic commission as
Right,
well. But to keep
right.
the integrity of the building, exactly what he's doing to that building.
Right.
And then there's potential for more development. So it'd be a smaller developer, it wouldn't be well, then you have a 40B issue.
Right.
So that property, yeah, so actually, maybe I have that listed in my notes. So that property also is a problem, because it either has to go 40B and you have no issues, or that's a restriction there. You have historic and you have zoning.
Yeah.
You just can't put up a multifamily there or multiple units that easy, because you have neighbors.
Well, you're right, we've had this plan probably for 15 years
Yeah,
of doing some work around that and protecting the historical
Right.
part of the building. That's always been part of the plan. To the 40B, we could do a friendly 40B,
yeah, right, exactly.
which doesn't make it adversarial. Brendan, you make a good point, though, because the word around town is we're liable to do it. But then we get feedback. Some people think it's a great idea. Some people, it's not clear. Well, let me stop there. We need to start discussions with the management of the junior theater and see what their feeling is about it.
It'd be nice to get them here, yeah.
Because I get mixed signals of that organization, that some people may think it's a great idea, others, because you got all the advantages of 204, but it's part of a bigger building. But we could.
Yeah.
So if it helps in that regard, the initial conversations can happen at the staff level, which sort of keeps the Board of Selectmen and the trustees at bay for right now. And then we can report out on that afterwards, if that's agreeable.
And when I mentioned neighbors, when the Royale was doing their thing originally, at one of the meetings, there was an issue where the other condo association that sits behind the junior theater was touching that property and having, I wasn't too sure what the restrictions were, that you
I'm
can't
not-
have
not-
multiple properties touching that are, there was
Right.
something in that meeting that came up. But that's what I was driving at. There's other issues going on that could pop up.
My only additional comment would be, I would encourage some dialogue with junior theater now, even in the initial stages, so there's some input that we're not forcing them into something. They have
Yeah.
some input early on.
Agreed. I think it's important to at least have discussion.
All right, come right up.
Good afternoon, Art Bowden, Housing Advocate. This piece of property just has come up to in the last 20 years, right at the threshold of being developed, and then for some reason, the rug pulls out from under it. Okay, that's my statement, opening statement. But there's something going on in my mind, and I can't quite get it out. So if the trust, which is, the trust controls this piece of property right now. So if you went to sell that property, how would you sell it? Would you just say, whoever is the best, the highest bidder gets it? Or could you put a preference on it?
So the answer is yes. That we could do either of those scenarios. We could do either, we could do both.
So, but being the affordable trust, would you dare cross that line and say it could be workforce housing? Or could it be, you know?
So, and if
I'm
any
just-
member
I'm
objects,
playing
I'll
the devil's
start, but-
advocate here, I guess.
So, given that the Board of Trustees owns the property,
Right,
the board has the ability to dispose of their own assets.
Okay.
So if we were to do that, and the purpose was to raise funds,
right.
to then bear upon affordable housing, we would probably do it in a manner without any restriction. We'd want to get the highest, best offer that's out there. If, however, the trustees wanted to do something related to affordable housing, the RFP would look completely different. So, given that there are no plans presently for the trust to sell that property,
I just, I'm,
that's sort of how the discussion would have to go. What, as we do with any procurement, what is the purpose of the procurement? And in this case, procurement being sale.
right.
Well, the trust would have to determine, it's to raise funds, raise capital, or it's to impact upon, hopefully, in my opinion, subsidized housing inventory.
Yeah. I understand your argument, and I hear your argument, but the people out in hinterland are gonna say, okay, just assume you go ahead and,
Well, what I'm trying to do at this meeting
Yeah.
is avoid a specific discussion about a
Okay.
specific property and a specific disposition, because we haven't given notice to that.
okay, I just wanna be in the room when that happens, because, you know,
Absolutely.
we need housing. We need affordable housing, and we need housing across the board.
Mm-hmm.
And if we sell property and that middle group that's being left out doesn't get a day in court or whatever, they're gonna say, well, what's happening? The town is selling land that they have, and they could, we've had a comment, we already have people in town that are looking for land to build at workforce housing level. That's all I wanna say. Thank you.
Thank you. Any response or any other comments?
Just real quickly, just to, I know I already mentioned it, but when Bowler did their feasibility study in 2020, and I'll just, give me 1 second. The biggest challenges are zoning requirements and historic overlay district for this particular property. Those are the two obstacles.
And then if I could, if I believe I'm correct, looking at the zoning, or excuse me, at the Google map, not the zoning map, the other property that would touch upon it, so to speak, is, I believe it's the Country Meadows condominiums,
Yeah, there was something
and the
about,
address is 2 Englewood Drive.
yeah,
So if that's something we can look into,
there's something in the bylaw
that
about
development,
two
if there
mul-
was-
yeah, I'm
yeah.
sorry.
we can research that based on those addresses.
Because I think Country Meadows actually connected, believe it or not, to the Royale for some reason. Actually goes all that way and connects.
Correct.
So,
Yep, it does. So under this agenda topic, it was a discussion of all properties owned by the trust. Any other properties that you want to talk about?
Oak Street,
So then, if there isn't, next on the agenda is a discussion discussion and possible vote to sell Oak Street property, and if I'm saying it correctly. What happened?
No, go ahead.
No, I think there's,
I think she's trying to get Paul's.
do you need the director? Sure, yep. So, reference to Oak Street would be 0 Oak Street, which was another one of the properties, Article 61, and I can look it up, but I don't know that we have the map and parcel. But if memory serves correctly, this was a discussion we had several months back with our conservation agent, and one of the things we were contemplating was if there was going to be any action on that, did we want to seek credits for water and sewer and anything else, generally speaking. So these would be map 61, parcel B1-A and B1-B. So I'll open that up for discussion.
So
And I'm not sure, was this an agenda topic from a member?
it was for me, just considering selling it. It's a property that I mentioned earlier that is not really meant for multiple units of any kind. At best, it might be a one or two-bedroom house. And the site plan that was done shows that. It's a very small piece of land that you can actually even work on. So this might be one of the properties that we sell. And if we have to do an RFP for that to get that going, Joe, what would be the next step if that was?
Well, my question would be, there's 2 parcels referenced.
Mm-hmm.
Are we thinking of it, the 2 parcels as one?
Yeah, just this
Yep.
one.
So then there's a couple of things that are of concern for me. Again, I wear that procurement wet blanket. Parcel B1-A has an assessed value as of December of 2022 of $255,000. And B1B is $250,100. So right away, if we're looking at them as 2 properties, we're talking an estimated value just based on the tax assessment of over $600,000. And so if we were contemplating selling, and I'd look back in the direction of our Director of Planning and Community Development, and yes, Elaine, if you wanted to sneak away, you could, for sure.
Thank you, Elaine.
Paul, you mentioned the concept, my words, not yours, but of erasing lot lines. And so if the trust wanted to commingle, for lack of a better word, and I know you'll teach me a better one, merging the 2 parcels, is that part of the approval not required process, or how would we go about doing that?
It could be done through an approval not required.
All right. So that would be item number 1, meaning if we wanted to sell the parcels together, we might want to merge them through an A&R. But for me, I'm always going to go back to the procurement issue of it. So we have a known value, separate, that when combined is $600,000. And so theoretically, we can, well, not theoretically, under the law, we can rely upon the assessed value because we're a municipality. If we don't want to rely upon that, we would have to do an appraisal. And my thinking, and I'm the biggest novice amongst everybody here in this stuff, but if we merge them together, there might be a potential greater value. So yes, it could be a 1-bedroom
Mhm.
and 1 bath. That matters too, right? But of an extraordinary value.
Yeah. I mean, you could separate them too, because the top lot, call it A, the
Yep.
north lot, that's where you can build, in that west upper corner. And you could sell the other lot for credits. We have to figure that, or you sell it all at once. But either way, I guess you could do either one, whatever the yields the most. I think we spend enough money on the property as far as doing the original site survey. There's no need to spend any more money.
Right, I would agree with that. So knowing that we have the agenda topic of discussion to sell, we would be well within our rights under the open meeting law to talk about the purpose for the sale. And gets back to an earlier question, does the trust want to sell those parcels for the highest and best offer to then use the proceeds to impact upon affordable housing?
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
If we're gonna sell, let's get the best value, and,
Mm-hmm.
I think I'd like to explore it a little more, because, Brandy, you raise a good point. You get credits, we get conservation restrictions that are worth money as well. It makes it more valuable.
Right.
It's easier to do. We can, restrict that deed, put it together, and makes it more valuable. So there's some options in how we best want to sell it.
And how do we sell it? Through a broker or an auction? Like,
So for procurement purposes, the trust is a part of the town, for better or for worse, so it has to go through the procurement process.
Okay.
Now, the only difference is when the Board of Selectmen looks to dispose of property, they have to declare it surplus. my understanding is that the Board of Trustees don't have that restriction. So it's an asset that we own, and we could dispose of it for the highest and best value. But it would still be, given the value we're talking about here, you're talking about either invitation for bids, because the value is far greater than the 100,000 threshold. Or you could do a very complex request for proposals, if my memory of the law is correct. But you have to dispose of it in a manner that comports with municipal requirements under state procurement.
So we would sell the two combined?
As Brendan said, we could combine them and sell them as one. We could sell them as two different parcels, and one could go to one owner, one could go to another owner or bidder, probably the better way to say it. Or we could sell one and get credits for the other.
Yeah. I mean, credits even, I don't even know if they're in demand.
Well, that's where I think we'd want to have more conversation with staff, bring our conservation agent back in, because as far as what we know we have evaluation by credible engineers on the property. We know we have title free and clear. So then really the only question is the biggest question of, what is the will of the trust? Now, I'll also throw out there, for my purposes, I wouldn't feel comfortable with 3 of a 5-member board making that decision in the short term. But the town will be able to, through the Board of Selectmen, take action on membership in the coming months, because there's 2 seats that come due at the end of June. But if we're gonna have that conversation, the dollar amount is significant enough that we should probably have along the lines of a public hearing or a public discussion on it. And as well as if there is a need or a desire for the Board of Selectmen to talk about it. Because that's a big deal,
Yeah, okay.
just my opinion.
Yeah, my only input of this would be, I'm still trying to, we give 3 options moving forward. Say if we combine them, then we need an ANR, is what we're told. Is that something we should do as a trust, to go to planning board and try to get that? Does that make it more valuable if we take that step first?
Anybody in the audience have any thoughts on that, Paul? Sorry, come to the microphone, please. And you can say, as you come to the microphone, you have no thoughts right now, but
I'm sorry, Larry,
Well, we raised one option that you mentioned was, ANR, to combine the lots. If I'm the property owner and want to sell it, is one of the steps we should take as a trust, take that to the planning board, to get an ANR, does that make it more valuable than having whoever buys it have to go through that process?
It could be more valuable, it might not make a difference. The answer to the question earlier about eliminating lot lines, if somebody's gonna develop the property, and there's a lot line, and there's a 20-foot setback on either side, there's, 40 feet that you can't do anything with. So if they were to be 2 contiguous lots that we own, that are divided by a lot line, even if we did do approval in our required plan and sold it as a chunk, someone could buy it and divide it back up if they wanted to do that. So without having seen it, I haven't looked at any of these properties, so it's hard for me to give you a good opinion.
Okay.
Yeah, Paul, we'll get you the site plan, we have it downstairs, and I marked up all the setbacks, even with the vernal pool, and you can have a better sense of it.
Okay.
so I would imagine then, even though we have the ability under the agenda, we're not gonna make a decision today. I would argue that we shouldn't, but it is something that, as with the other 2, we can have some staff evaluation of it and have topics come back at the next meeting. But for this one, as with the previous one for 265 Sisson, and your Housing Committee and Housing Authority, right?
That's correct.
Are you chair of either one?
No.
So as the member of Housing Committee and Housing Authority just indicated, if we're gonna have these discussions about selling, we need to have our partners in town government be aware of that as well. For the 265 Sisson, there's a disruptive nature to that, although we could provide the tenants there with an alternate space. but two properties of this magnitude on Oak Street, and the combined potential value of it, I think requires more input than just our meeting at this stage today. That's one person's opinion, though. Have staff evaluate and bring back?
Yep.
Sound good?
Sounds good.
Any other comments to be made on 0 Oak Street? All right, so then next on the agenda, discussion on Housing Committee progress. Was that a request of a member? I'm not really sure what that topic gets to.
I'm sorry.
That was Brendan.
Yeah, that was me. That was the, oh, just the housing committee. I sat in on their last, well, I didn't sit in on it, the last 2 meetings before that, but I also watched it, and they seem to be making some great progress. One thing I want to talk about is, I watched the Town of Orleans meeting. They've made great progress with development and getting housing. So now they're on to what's north of 80 AMI, and that seems to be a hot topic. And our housing committee started talking about that as well.
Good.
But maybe next time I'm at their meeting, I want to talk about what their mandate is from the Board of Selectmen. It's really to help with the 10%, the SHI list, so the subsidized housing inventory list. So, not saying I don't want to tell them what to do, but I want to make sure that they understand that they might want to be focused on that. Anything from 80 to 100%, they can go to CPC, get funding, town meeting, but I want them to know that we could be a direct funding source for an idea that they come up with if it's 80% AMI or less. So it'd be nice if they were focused on that. Maybe that's talking to the Board of Selectmen to give them more of a directive, but I think they're making their way. They just reformed, so they're going through the motions as well. So it's similar to what we did here for 3+ years. So, but anyways, I just want them to know that we could be a direct funding source for an idea, and we need their help for the 80% or less.
Thank you. So, Elizabeth, are you on? We've got, I think, Elizabeth Harder.
I am indeed. Hello. Sorry, my voice is shot. Allergies. We have been working on our mission statement, and I believe that while we're supposed to assist you and the authority in any possible way on 80%, we also need to be focusing on the above 80%. We need to be working on the workforce housing and market rate housing. I mean, the more market rate units there are, that leaves more houses and things to buy and turn into affordable. For example, we could help with selling just off the top of my head, we could help with selling the Sisson Road property, perhaps to the developers of 2 Englewood Drive, or we could save that building, which would be my recommendation, perhaps put up a smaller matching one and turn that into market rate 55 plus housing. So I think that's just an idea. I also attended the League of Women Voters housing yesterday and got a lot of good ideas. And I think that one of the big things that the committee should be working on is collecting all those ideas and figuring out a way to make them work in conjunction with you.
Right, so my concern about going above 80% or even 100%, there's really no funding for that. That's the problem. So when the state set up, and correct me if I'm wrong, anyone here as I speak, when the state set up a way for the town to, create the trusts, it was a way to get that funding in the hands of a trust to, not work around town meeting, but to move fast because it's so important. So when you start talking about over 80% AMI, and even the word workforce doesn't really apply to whether it's 120 or 200%, I think that's a term that we should just move to the side. I mean, everyone is in the workforce. It's probably just not a great term to use. And there's really no funding above that. So I think your board, and I could be, correct me if I'm wrong, it's really to focus on projects 100% or less. 80% or less, we can direct fund you, or 100% or less, you can come up with an idea and go directly to town meeting for it. But just keep in mind, to work with us, we're a direct funding source, and we want to be there to assist, and we're open to all ideas, so. But just,
Yeah,
there's just no funding above.
I disagree. You're the trust, you worry about 80% AMI. The Housing Authority can worry about 80% AMI. We can help you in any way possible with those. Anything you need from us to help you with 80% AMI projects would be great. But I believe the Cape is not, the housing crisis is not going to be solved by one thing. It's not going to be solved by only capital A affordable. That's not the needs of the town. The town needs all levels of housing, from 80% to 200 plus. And the committee has the time to focus on those.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I agree with all of that, and I'm just looking at, maybe if you work on your mission statement, maybe I'm just confused, because when I look at the website, the purpose of the Housing Committee is to work towards diverse solutions and addressing the town's affordable housing shortage as Harwich continues to make progress towards the 10% recommended by the state of Massachusetts, which would be DHCD, they set that.
Right.
So,
And that's why we began the process of rewriting that at our last meeting. And we
Yeah.
will have discussion on the new mandate at our next meeting. Because again, I don't think we, as the Housing Committee, should waste our time, not waste our time, but spend our time duplicating the efforts of the Housing Authority and the Housing Trust, but should rather be in support of you, whatever you need to do, while we investigate and work on the other housing needs that affect Harwich.
okay, I'll leave it at that. Like I said, I just want to be, I'll say it again, because I want to say it again. I just think there's no funding set up above that. So I guess I'll ask for your help, whatever you can do to help us as a priority, and maybe the Board of Selectmen I can reach out to them as well and maybe help you set your mandate. But I think it's important that we put all efforts towards 80% AMI or less. Thank you.
Yeah, I disagree, and the funding doesn't come from the town. You can have all the town money if that's what you want. There are other ways to get funding for above 80% AMI
Yeah,
housing.
Yeah, and it'd be great it'd be great to
The
see a new
committee
mission
should
statement.
work
then.
on. You
Yeah.
can take all the 80% AMI money. We won't need that money.
Yeah.
We have other funding sources for above 80%. And just again, that's really what we need desperately, is diversity in housing.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Recognizing that our agenda said discussion on Housing Committee progress. Elizabeth, were you making reference a moment ago to the Housing Committee or the Housing Authority when you say you have other funding sources?
the Housing Committee should be concerning itself with organizing the funding opportunities and development opportunities for over 80% AMI, while the trust focuses on 80% and under. The Housing Authority also focuses on 80% AMI. So that could accept town money. We take a little right now for vouchers. we could change what we use the town money for, and then the housing authority could probably do more with the town's money, but your entity and the and the housing authority are the two entities that should be concerned with 80% and under, and all the federal and state money that can go to that.
Thank you. One of the questions I had based on the topic, and we don't necessarily have to get into it today, but I know that under the general bylaw that gives further structure to the Affordable Housing Trust, it indicates that the Affordable Housing Trust shall work with the Harwich Housing Committee to develop an affordable housing plan, which shall be updated each year and a copy presented to the Board of Selectmen. And I think I'm accurate in saying during my tenure here, I don't believe the two parties have done that. Now, I know that there was a period of time when the Harwich Housing Committee didn't have a quorum. Elizabeth, have you been discussing at your committee meetings that item?
Yes, we have been discussing in general, not in depth,
Sure.
on how best to work with the trust. I do believe we should work on a plan together, but it was made clear that before the last time we heard about an affordable housing trust plan, we were told that that's why Jen Goldson had been hired, so we wouldn't be necessary in coming up with your plan. We'd be happy to help you guys come up with a plan. That would be great.
Thank you. So for me, just as one member of the Board of Trustees, there is the concept of an action plan that Jen Goldson and J.M. Goldson Associates are working on. I think it's a little bit of the horse out of the barn thing, but, you know, this dates back to 2018 and 2019, when the Board of Trustees and the trust fund were created to say, how does the trust, how do the Board of Trustees want to operate as a fiduciary with a trust? So Jen's still doing that work. We're going to have a discussion in a moment about the next steps on that. But for me, that's separate and distinct from the bylaw requirement that says the two entities being the trust, so I'll say Board of Trustees, and the Harwich Housing Committee shall, and I was always taught by municipal attorneys that shall is must, develop an affordable housing plan. So that's separate and distinct from an action plan. And I'll look to the audience because there are folks that were here before me. Does anybody recall if this was ever done yet as a joint effort? Art?
Art Bowden again. Yeah, let me try to get my thoughts clear. What you're reading there, that's the old mission statement or charge, and that was basically enforced before the trust came along. And now it's like turning the light on in the room that we've been in the room of darkness.
Art, I apologize for interrupting, but I just want to be clear. I'm reading from the general bylaws, Chapter 140, Affordable Housing Trust, which was developed in tandem with the trust fund here. So that's, I'm not reading from the Housing Committee
That's right.
charge, I'm reading from the
Yeah,
bylaw
it's a recent
requirement.
document.
Yeah, that's correct. It's 100% correct. Where the, pardon the expression, where the rub came in, or where the confusion came in, or whatever came in the room, the Housing Committee's charge never really got changed to divorce ourselves from part of the Affordable Housing Initiative. So when the trust came along, we had two entities in town that were basically, if you want to say, well, not totally with the same charge, but with charges that kind of had locked heads, so to speak. So what we're in the process now, as Elizabeth pointed out, and I think we're really making some good progress now, which we haven't been able to do in the past for sundry reasons, is we're trying to divorce ourselves from what you call the ceiling, what your ceiling you have, and our ceiling is, there's no ceiling on housing. We're advocates for all housing, plus the affordable housing also. That's very important. But there's also, like Elizabeth pointing out, it's very important that other levels of housing
So Art,
support.
I apologize for cutting you off, but the topic right now is whether there has been a joint effort between the Affordable Housing Trust Fund of Harwich and the Harwich Housing Committee on a plan that was ever presented to the Board of Selectmen.
There had been some attempts, and it never really came to fruition. If you
So
answer.
then if I could, and thank you for that,
I think we should do that first.
Brendan, if I could just for a second, please. Recognizing that the folks that are here on behalf of the Housing Committee
Right.
are talking about changing your charge, which is how I think the Board of Selectmen would know it.
Right.
That's something that you would then have to go back to the Board of Selectmen.
Oh, yeah.
For their approval.
Yeah.
That-
Well,
Notwithstanding, Elizabeth, if I could just continue for a moment. So notwithstanding that, the trust has an obligation under our general bylaws where we must work with the Housing Committee to develop an affordable housing plan,
Okay.
which we must then present to the selectmen, and it's supposed to be done annually. So my overall point on that simply is, given that the two parties have never done that,
Yeah.
we should probably start working on a schedule to try to do something so that this could be the year that the
That we
Board of
do
Selectmen is
something.
presented with something.
That sounds like a
Yeah.
song. This could be the year.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect example of what I was talking about, of how we can help the trust, how we can, not help, serve the trust and the town by working on 80% AMI without sacrificing working above it. I think it's a great idea for the committee and the trust to work together on a plan.
Okay, so then we can agenda that, starting at the trust level. Certainly, the Housing Committee can do as they prefer, but we can agenda that for the Housing Trust Fund to talk about in the coming weeks.
Yes,
So we can
we
come up
have
with
a meeting in
plan of action.
2.5 weeks, so it'll be on our agenda at our next meeting.
Excellent, thank you. Was there any other thing to be brought up regarding this topic? All right, so then we have item H, which is update on Jen Gouldson. And again, I want to be fair, Jen Gouldson is the principal. The firm is J.M. Gouldson and Associates. So Jen and some of her colleagues might be helping us. So I will just refer to J.M. Gouldson and Associates. A discussion on meeting and community engagement. Brianna, am I correct that you have some information on that?
Yep, so Paul and I met with Jen to go over our schedules, and it works out that she will be able to be at your next meeting on May 22nd in person to go over the site plan, or the site tour that you all did.
Yep.
And then she did have a tentative date for the community forum event, which would be the evening of June 27th.
Do you know what day of the week that is?
I believe it's a Tuesday.
Thank you.
So,
June 27th at what time?
she just said evening of, so I think
Okay,
that will be
all right.
discussed.
And location to be determined?
Yes,
Okay.
And you're saying there's a meeting May 22nd?
May 22nd, which is the next meeting
Our normal meeting
Yep.
at 1 o'clock.
for the trust. Yep, so she'll be here in person.
Thank you. Any comments or questions from trustees?
No, just excellent.
Yep.
Good to hear.
Brendan? Anybody in the audience on that topic? So as was noted, our next meeting is scheduled for May 22nd, 2023 at 1 PM. We assume that we'll be here in the Griffin Room. Before I seek a motion to adjourn, I just want to make a quick announcement of a housing-related event. So we were made aware that the Cape Cod Commission, which, as we all may know, are working on a regional housing strategy. They're having several sub-regional stakeholder meetings this week, and I'm thrilled to announce that the Lower Cape Sub-Regional Stakeholder Working Group will be here in Harwich. It'll be in the community center, and activity room number 3. So that is this Wednesday at 1 PM. And certainly anyone that's tied into this meeting is tied into being a stakeholder on regional housing strategy. The timing, as I understand it, is fortuitous because they're also, they're in Wellfleet tomorrow, and they are also in Mashpee on Thursday. So Lower Cape being smack dab in the middle, or smack dab in the middle of their schedule. But again, this would be a regional housing strategy session for the Lower Cape Sub-Regional Stakeholder Group, Wednesday, April 26th at 1 PM at the Harwich Community Center. With that, seeing as there's no other business to come before the trust, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
There's only one other person that can second that?
Second.
All right, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye, we are adjourned. Thanks, everybody.